The Hornets go 1-1 over the weekend, but the real question is, did LaMelo Ball get his groove back? We talk about it today. Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts. And don't forget, that always includes YouTube. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time, the website that you can download the Game Time app or go to the website. Doesn't matter. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. So again, thanks to Game Time. Thanks to Doug, too, joining me as always. You can find him on his substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. There you can also find his subtext information. And you can listen to me on Sports Radio 92.7 WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m., where I'll at least be talking about one team that got a win over the weekend. A lot of that show will be shared speaking about a team that got destroyed over, by a team that had among the worst defenses in the league. But at least the Charlotte Hornets got one win, Doug. And I think if you were to say, okay, the Hornets going into the weekend, I'll give you a 1-1 record. Will you take it? I would have said, absolutely. I will take a 1-1 record. After the start, they win the opener. They drop 3 straight. They're at least 2-6 now with a chance to win last night. And Doug, they gave up a pretty big lead, but we saw LaMelo go bananas in the fourth quarter. And that was what was fun. So a couple of things as to why we could ask if LaMelo got his groove back. One, we got to see a lockdown defensive possession.
What?
Against Indiana, against Tyrese Halliburton, who also went bananas in a certain quarter in their matchup. So LaMelo had the defensive possession. That was fun. That was as fun as a defensive possession for the win as you're going to get. Just lock up, steal, LaMelo pounding his chest, feeling great. That was awesome. Awful shooting night, though. Okay, so then Dallas, it looks like more of the same. Awful shooting night. And then the fourth quarter happens, and he's shooting it all over the place. He's getting to the rim. Thank God, LaMelo did not shoot from the hip. He actually took the ball, 2 hands, welcomed contact, and had an and one opportunity where he's also doing dipsy-do reverse layups. All that to say, Doug, is it okay to say if LaMelo got his groove back this week?
I think so, because the progress wasn't just the scoring, although that is a lot of it. I mean, against Dallas, he scored 7 points through the first 3 quarters. In the fourth quarter, he scored 23 points on 8 of 9 shooting, and he hit 5 3-pointers. And he only took 4 3-pointers in the first 3 quarters, so a lot of those misses were around the rim, which we've seen a lot of so far this season. But I think where you can see the progress is how involved he was on the boards and getting others involved. And that's what Gordon Hayward gave him advice in terms of, which was, hey, listen, if you're out of the groove, get others involved, get within the flow of the game, and then everything else will take care of itself. And, if you're asking me, hey, do you want your star player to, struggle a little bit early in a game, but come through it in the clutch period of the game, I'm going to take that at least for a little while he's finding his groove. I think he is. Look, triple-double, 30 points, 10 rebounds, 13 assists. It's hard to look at that and say, well, he's still got some stuff to work on. I mean, yeah, you'd like him to come out of the gates firing on all cylinders, and they did lose the game. No doubt about that. But he is finding a little bit of progress each and every game, and I think that has to be, promising for fans.
Yeah, LaMelo affected the game in a big way, facilitating at least. The first half, I think he finished with 11 in the first half and then only would get 2 the rest of the way, and so he was on triple-double watch immediately. In fact, Doug, he ends up with 30, and I did have the thought. I didn't think it would happen because it's so rare, but I did have the thought, is he going to be shy in the points category of a triple-double? Because that, to me, at least was on the table for just an eensy-weensy bit, and then he explodes and goes 8 of 9. But I thought it was the way he got his points, too, in the fourth, Doug. Like, that's what I was so excited about. I thought you did see his flair. You did see him bragging about the three-point shots, great, feeling himself about it. And to me, if we're talking about him looking different in the first 5 games compared to his film last year in the games that he was healthy, I thought the fourth quarter was kind of the same. I thought the fourth quarter looked different than what we had seen in the first 3 or 4 games of this season, where it looked like he was laboring so much just to get to the rim. And again, this is all about the not explosive driving by his guys, but he's so crafty. He's quick enough. He's got crazy handles. He likes the quick crossover to the left and then behind the back to the right to create some space. He was doing that, and that was effective again. So it to me, I do think LaMelo looked like a different basketball player, which is helping. Hopefully we can get something a little more consistent where we don't get it just one quarter, but we get something even close to that neighborhood throughout the course of a game like we had seen earlier in his career.
Yeah, a couple of other things that I liked. I mean, I think he's generally staying engaged on the defensive end. There are those possessions where you go like, what is he doing there? Why isn't he closing out? Where is he? Why is he taking those gambles? That just resulted in an easy transition bucket for the other team. You're going to have those moments for the rest of his career. You have to come to terms with those moments. But I think generally he stayed engaged. And then, again, game on the line, 1v1, ISO opportunity against Halliburton, he shuts him down. So that's nice. What's also nice, I think, particularly in the Dallas game, is that in the first 3 quarters, again, 3 of 14, 0 of 4 from 3. So a lot of takes near the rim, and he got a lot of contact. And I didn't see in that game against Dallas as much of LaMelo begging the refs for a call. So much so that he takes himself out of the defensive play. He doesn't get back in transition. And the teams that they've been playing, Walker, over this first 6-game slate, have mostly all been teams that love to push it in transition. I mean, it is crazy how fast these games have been played, and the Hornets generally like to run as well. And so it requires everyone to quickly get back on defense. And I thought against Dallas, he stopped doing that. And I think he's got to continue that. Keep going to the rim, keep welcoming contact. If you don't get the call, pick your spots, because if the game's still going on, you've got to get back on defense and you've got to hit some stuff at the rim. I think when you start hitting at the rim, because not all of these misses have been because he's gotten contact and not gotten a call. It have been focus issues, have been, just shooting it long or shooting it short. He's got to start hitting those. And when he does, I think the refs will wake up and start respecting what he's doing at the rim. But I love that at least against Dallas, he was focused on winning the game.
Well, and I do think that's what I liked about it, right? That's exactly what I'm talking about, is in him getting to the rim and actually, welcoming contact and not shying away from it, not because he's soft, but just because he thinks that's the right play to move the basketball around. And then all of a sudden you're moving it around and the arm that's swatting at the basketball doesn't hit you, and you've just created a harder shot for yourself. But he goes in and welcomes the contact to that point, and you see him finish a little bit more at the basket, which is great. And then the 3-point shot, once that one went in, then just the dam was no longer there. It started rushing in, and we even saw this. What was it? A couple of games back. I don't think it was against Brooklyn. It wasn't against Indiana, but it was the game before that, I believe, where LaMelo had 2 threes in a row, and you could see it got him going a little bit. Very much once I see one go in, watch out, because it could just be a crazy quarter for you. And that's what happened in the fourth.
Totally. And of those 13 assists, I counted 3 or 4 that were those sort of magic, physics-breaking, laser passes that we've grown accustomed to seeing LaMelo make on a regular basis, but that I did not see him making accurately or even trying to make in the first 5 contests. And that's why I think this particular game against Dallas was different. And I think it started with that stop against Halliburton against Indiana. It carried over into this game against Dallas. And it's nice that he's fighting through all of these scoring struggles. We can't take that for granted. He could shrink in that moment in the fourth quarter and say, look, I'm 3 of 14, but I've got a lot of assists. I'm just going to keep facilitating to others. Instead, he goes into the phone booth, he puts on the Superman costume and tries to go out there and win a game. Despite, and this is the one worry that I have, despite the fact that he goes in for a layup, falls hard on that right ankle, grabs the right ankle, winces, does pop right back up, but goes to the bench. They were looking at it. He looked like he was in pain. They tied his shoes tighter, which I don't know, is that some kind of tourniquet system? Like tie him so tight I can't feel my toes anymore. But that's concerning that they're looking at the right ankle. That's the one he fractured. That's the one that he had the surgery on, and that made it so that he didn't do contact until right before camp. Man, he got his groove back, and now I'm starting to worry again.
Yeah, no, it's a Ronnie Lott situation. Ronnie Lott cut off his fingers so he could play football and wouldn't have to miss more time. It just tie the shoes so tight that I can't feel pain, and I'll go out there and bring you a great fourth quarter.
Gutsy, man. Gutsy, but concerning.
Yeah, it is concerning. All right, so in a way, I thought this game against Dallas was the exact opposite than what we saw against Indy, and we can explain that a little more. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Tease me.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
It's an Indiana recap coming up next. Tyrese Halliburton goes crazy, but LaMelo has the winning play. We'll get to all of it in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase, and you can see the view from your seat, too, before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. You can find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, even more than that. With zone deals, you pick the section, and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings too. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, Locked On NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. More Locked On Hornets coming up next. So, Doug, I thought this Dallas game was the exact opposite of the Indiana game, because I think what you saw was LaMelo scoring again in the fourth quarter. You saw him, scoring at a couple of different levels, and it felt like LaMelo was the story that was good, even if they got the loss. I think what's interesting, too, is you go back to LaMelo not scoring at all against Indiana, but they get the win. Now, what might be the main takeaway, and in fact, I do think it's the main takeaway, it's the defensive possession that everybody's going to be paying attention to. I had a few buddies that were discussing, okay, yeah, I know he shot 4 of whatever it was against Indiana. I'm trying to pull up the box score right now. But at least he had that defensive possession. It was 4 of 15. And it's not good. And LaMelo has struggled so much shooting the basketball. I mean, it's been every game. It's been awful percentages. It's not been a good efficiency. But at least they won the game despite him not shooting well because he locked up at the other end. I think in this game, okay, he shot well. It feels like LaMelo is the story, except it comes in a loss. And so no matter how you slice it, it's all about LaMelo, what we saw the last couple of games.
Well, and the problem with him not shooting it well is that this team does not feature a lot of three-point shooting. It's not as if that those shots can start to go to other players and they'll be okay, especially if Terry Rozier has to miss a few more games with a left groin strain that he suffered at the end of this game against Indiana. The Hornets right now, I believe, are dead last in three-point attempt rate, and they are not hitting them either. And I think after those first 4 games where they weren't hitting well, there seems to be an adjustment where they've said, all right, forget trying to shoot a ton of threes. We're going to attack the rim over and over and over and just wear these teams down at the rim. And it's worked, to be fair. I mean, against Indiana, it was a battle of the Hornets going to the rim versus Indiana trying to drive and kick out for threes. And typically when you trade 2s for 3s, it's not going to go great. But the Hornets, thanks to Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington, and I think Rozier and Miller, for sure, Brandon Miller hitting these mid-range pull-ups, they've been able to accumulate just enough threes to deal with the fact that they're playing at a disadvantage against teams that are going to shoot a ton of three-pointers. It worked out against Indiana because of a crazy sequence there at the end. I mean, that was an insane ending. And it didn't work against Dallas, who had enough firepower in Luka Doncic and Grant Williams, the Charlatan, and Kyrie Irving to combat how well Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington have been playing inside of the arc.
All right, so do you want to go with a full-on Indiana recap and maybe go outside of LaMelo a little more? I know you opened up the doors with PJ, with Brandon. Where do you want to start, Doug?
Well, I think Indiana is an important game because it did get them off the 3-game losing streak. This would have been apocalyptic, I think. I mean, we would have been talking about, where is this team going in terms of head coach, in terms of lineup changes, if they had just completely blanked here before Washington. And Steve Clifford, for his part, said, look, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to make a bunch of changes. And they went into this game and played, I think, well in the first half, especially defensively. And then Tyrese Halliburton just completely exploded in that third quarter, 25 points in a 50-point quarter. Walker, when you give up 50 points in a quarter, you simply just don't win basketball games. That's what's that might be the craziest thing. I think Sam Purley pulled this from StatHead that it's only happened on the road 11 times in NBA history. Or no, I think it's only happened 11 times and only 2 times on the road. Like, that's nuts.
Oh, well, and I actually was listening to Sam Farber on the broadcast live at first last night against Dallas, and what he was saying against Indiana was, it's the wildest quarter that I've ever called in my life from an individual with Tyrese Halliburton going off, and even from a team scoring 50. I mean, Doug, I remember, man, it's not like that anymore, but I remember for a while, like 77 and a half was the most that I had seen through 2 quarters of play, and it just like it would barely break 80. Eventually it would, but 50, it's absolutely crazy, and the Hornets are still able to win because it's fresh off the heels of a 19-point performance in the second, a 30-point difference from the Pacers from their second quarter scoring output to what they did in the third. And you're right about Tyrese Halliburton, or the play against him, the quarter, all of it. It's crazy. One thing I'll say too, Mark.
Oh yeah, I was waiting. I mentioned Gordon, I mentioned PJ, I mentioned Brandon Miller. I've yet to mention the guy who was the leading scorer in this game, 27 points. And I was waiting for you to just come in and drop the hammer on me. Like, how could you not mention Mark Williams at this point?
Oh, no hammer. No, all those guys deserve some love. But Mark, I think at the end of the game, the fact that he does not miss a free throw in that contest, I think about how big that is, man. From your center, taking that many, going 9 of 9 from the foul line,
crazy,
including hitting 2 real clutch free throws with inside 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And there was only one bucket scored by the Hornets inside 2:30, and that was a LaMelo alley-oop to Mark Williams. So Mark going for 27, his high, he needed a good game too. And he's leading the league in field goal percentage. They're not all dunks, but actually even we saw against Dallas, just some nice hands from Mark yesterday against Dallas, making some, there was the bad pass, honestly, from PJ in the paint, and it bounces around, beep, bop, pinball, boom, got it, and then scores on the other side. We're seeing Mark offensively really help this team. We want defensively for him to just be nothing is going to go up here around the rim, and that's great. He has that. That's why we love Mark. But offensively, Doug, we've had a couple of 8 for 8 performances from the field. I mean, even if they're easy shots, we haven't had that before still, and I still think there's a lot of value in that.
Going back to that alley-oop that he had at the end of that game, which was an important possession, Melo's pass was off, and Mark Williams on the roll, it was off both, I think, in accuracy and timing. And Williams, by the time he finished his roll, he was almost behind the rim when he reached back to tap that alley-oop in. I mean, it's the length that guy has just makes him able to make plays that other centers are simply not going to be able to make. And he did it against Dallas too. As you said, the one against Dallas should have been a foul call. Well, there were 2. The first one should have been a foul call, and they called it side out on Kyrie because he pushed him while he was trying to tap it in. Even these refs
it was the second tap. Yeah, the official said he tapped it twice, which does show you're right. It encapsulates everything you're saying right now. It's the exact play I thought of too. And they said, nope, it was the second tap. And the foul happened on the first, and so he wasn't shooting.
Don't get me started. I'm gonna save my ref thoughts for this third segment against Dallas. So stay tuned because I was smelling brisket on these refs. Okay, some home cooking against Dallas. Don't get me started on these folks. But I think huge win against Indiana. There are obvious problems. This is not a good basketball team, and there are a multitude of reasons why that is the case. But you know what? they are a tougher basketball team than they were pre-Indiana. Honestly, I'm going to give a lot of credit to Brandon Miller, who got into another little kerfuffle in this one.
He's doing it.
That Nesmith, who he gave Nesmith like a big shoulder to the chest because Nesmith was moving his screen. And Brandon Miller was trying to get around and close out on the corner, and Nesmith was moving around. You can't do that. You're not an offensive lineman, Aaron Nesmith. You're not an offensive lineman. This is basketball. It's not football. So he gets a big shoulder to the chest and then cries about it and tries to go fight Brandon Miller. And I love Brandon Miller's face. If you're not watching on YouTube, it was basically like, what are you doing? Like, I mean, come on. So I love Brandon Miller's attitude right now, and I think it's leaking into everyone. And this team is much tougher, and they showed it against Dallas too. They lost the game, yes, but this is a much tougher team than they were to start the season. They might not be better because they don't have enough shooting, but they'll be in some of these games that they have no business being in.
I want to talk about the more shooting thing and Brandon Miller more. I want to continue that conversation on both fronts. Let's do it. Coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We'll give you the Dallas recap, not only discuss LaMelo, but start to look at some of the other players and what they did in this game. Not before FanDuel, though. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can score early and often this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team will win. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, even more than that. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. More Locked On Hornets ahead. All right, before we get to this Dallas game, Doug, you have been on the there's not enough shooting train, and with this team as currently constructed. Mm-hmm. And you've not been wrong by the numbers. You haven't. They have not been shooting well. My question, like, going into this season, you had been saying that as well. And what's weird for me is that 4 out of the 5 starters that you have right now are all shooters. LaMelo is a shooter. Terry Rozier is a shooter. PJ Washington is a shooter. And Gordon Hayward. But last year, Gordon, certainly his three-point percentage came down. Mm-hmm. Terry Rozier, his three-point percentage came down. Mm-hmm. PJ Washington, I mean, even in his somewhat young career still, his three-point shooting came down. And so my question to you, because you're not wrong, but I look at those players and I think, okay, they're still threats. They're still guys that have the ability to knock them down, and yet they haven't this season. LaMelo is still in the game. Our problems with LaMelo have been his health, facilitation for sure, because you're talking about the Magic, right? That's the word we've been using. It hasn't been there except for maybe the last 2 games, certainly against Dallas. So why are you so down on the shooting? Is it because you think the roles have changed and last year is going to be somewhat transitioning to this season? Because now you even have Brandon Miller off of the bench. And so why are you right? Because I didn't see it coming, to be honest with you. And we'll see if it fixes itself. But in the short sample, you're right so far.
I think there are a couple of issues. I mean, obviously, in the micro, when you just look at this section of the season that they're in right now, guys that typically should be shooting a little bit better from 3 are not. And then you've got this weird, bizarro situation where LaMelo turns it on in the 4th, and Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington turn into pumpkins in the 4th. And they were dependable for you
last night.
I know. I mean, 2 of 7 for Gordon against Dallas in the 4th quarter. PJ, who I think took a knee to the quad and was trying to kind of gut through it, and he missed 3 shots in the 4th quarter too, and then finally gave up the ghost and couldn't play anymore on that final couple of possessions there. But yeah, so I think there's that issue. But then if you look beyond the starters, I mean, that's really where the core of my take is that if you look beyond the starters, there's not enough shooting coming off the bench. Yes, Brandon Miller, but look at what happened when Terry Rozier went out. Who did they go to? They went to,
for sure.
They went to Bryce and they brought Ish off, and neither of those are answers for a lot of questions. But one of those questions is, how are they going to generate more 3-point shooting?
Which, by the way, Ish's first appearance. 3 fouls, bang, like immediately picking up 3 fouls as soon as he entered.
And also, you look at the center position. I think that's where the final piece of my take is they can't play 5 out because Mark's not shooting threes. I don't think he's going to hit his over-under of 10. I don't think he's going to shoot threes.
I know.
Nick is still hiding it. I don't know why. I don't know why he keeps hiding this shot under a bushel, but he is. He's playing a little bit better. That's nice. But he's hiding it. But look at these. I mean, some of these teams that they've played that can play 5 out, you just like immediately see the difference that it makes offensively for teams. The moon ball. God, this stupid moon ball by Miles Turner. Just like it changes the calculus of how you defend the team. And the Hornets can't do that. So you put all of those together in a basket and you look at the stats and you go, yeah, I mean, this team, unless they go out in the trade market and find more shooting, are going to have to be incredible at the rim, incredible from mid-range to make up for the fact that despite having a few good shooters on this team, they don't have enough. Because that's the NBA we're in. It used to be, I mean, even as the three-point revolution was happening, early on in the three-point revolution, if you had 3 or 4 good shooters, you were fine. You could make it. But now it's turned into, of your 9 or 10 man rotation, you need 5 or 6 of those guys to be able to shoot. And it's better to have 6 or 7 or 8 of those guys who can shoot. That's what the good teams are dealing with right now. And the Hornets maybe have 3 or 4.
So you mentioned Mark Williams. I looked up his stats. I was looking up his shot chart. I wanted to see how many mid-ranges he's taken so far. Do you remember a mid-range shot from Mark Williams this season?
I feel like I have one in my head. But is the answer 0?
I think it's 0. I'm trying to look it up now. What I will tell you is if you go to cleaning the stats or cleaning the glass, looking at the stats, yes, his points per shot attempt, he's in the 100th percentile because he's just shooting everything at the rim. And
that Nets game is going to be an outlier for a little while because I mean they were giving him free looks at the rim because that was the strategy.
Well, and then he took it a little bit against Dallas and Indiana, but you're right. Yeah. So we can just remember that game against Phoenix where Mark Williams did hit a couple of jump shots. I wonder if that's going to be a part of anything somewhat consistently as we go on. Doug, not only is he not taking threes, is my point. I mean, there's not even the 15-foot pick and pop. Like there's no pick and pop with LaMelo running off a Mark screen, Mark not diving, and instead just hanging out. I guess it's just because you think Mark Williams is going to be able to finish anything. And look, he has. Like, it would be, I'll admit, it would be kind of funny for me to suggest, hey, I know he's making everything. I know he's quite literally the most efficient center right now when it comes to pick and roll and when it comes to, or not pick and roll, but when it comes to just flat out shooting percentage, maybe we move it back. But do you think there's anything there with a LaMelo, Mark Williams pick and pop at all for him to start just leaking a little bit away from the rim instead of standing in front of it the whole time and being the lob threat that he's done such a great job being?
Not right now. Right now, they have to have him at the rim. I mean, he's not rebounding particularly well when he's standing under the rim. I mean, I can't imagine. And the team in general also, it's not just Mark Williams. The team is still struggling to rebound. So I can't imagine what that would look like if you're talking about strategically pulling him away from the rim to start looking for looks outside of the paint. So I think at this moment in time, that's not in the cards. But absolutely, it's something you want to look at towards the future. I have a couple of other things from this Dallas game. I sort of telegraphed it in the second segment. I want to know your take on this because I think I've made mine clear. I think the referees in the third quarter were pretty determined to make a close game out of this Hornets-Mavericks game. I'm not one that typically comes on here and complains about refereeing because I see a lot of it almost every game that the Charlotte Hornets play. And I think it's, for the most part, I think talking about the referees is excuse-making. But some of the non-calls on Teo Maledon, as he was getting, I mean, he looked like a character from Mike Tyson's Punch-Out after you get done winning a match. Like, I mean, he had a gauze in his nose, he had a bruise on his eye. I mean, the guy was getting pummeled, no calls there. And then they were making all of these ticky-tack calls. And, you know, the call that I already mentioned that Mark Williams should have been shooting free throws. It was just ridiculous. I didn't love the whistle in that third quarter. It smelled like brisket. It smelled like home cooking in Texas.
No, I didn't like it either. It's also been a theme this year more than not. I mean, if you look at the officiating against the Hornets, look, my timeline, Hornets Twitter usually complains about officiating, and I get it, but it feels like that's been a little more prevalent this year at the start of the season than it has in years past. They're just not getting them. I was happy that Luka Doncic got a tech. I was like, okay, great. I know I think Eric Collins made the joke about Ashley saying Luka's really attempting to not get the technicals anymore. And then Eric said, Ashley, you told me that wasn't going to happen anymore. I'm just glad they gave him a tag. But you're right. It wasn't very good. Even if we can say that's not why the Hornets lost, that's not specifically why the Hornets lost, we can also acknowledge it didn't help.
It's not why they lost. And I'll tell you why they lost the Dallas game in particular. I think when you're going up against a Dallas team that has as much offensive talent as they do, you have to nail all of the details. And for at least 2.5 quarters, the Hornets did just that. Their defensive game plan against Luka in the first 2 quarters was stellar. Guys were flying all around the place. The rotation on the backside was amazing. They were double teaming Luka, forcing the ball out of his hands. I texted Nick Angstead, host of the Locked On Mavericks podcast, and said, all of the guys that I want to shoot for Dallas are shooting right now, because those guys were not Kyrie Irving for the most part, and they weren't Luka Doncic. It was everybody else, because the Hornets' defensive game plan was solid. Mm-hmm. But then when push came to shove, you had some detail issues that started to leak out in the third quarter. They had 3 goaltends by the third quarter. That's 6 points. Like, what is this, the 1980s? Teams don't have 3 goaltends anymore. So you had issues like that. But then, and even flashing back to the Indiana game, because Walker, you and I talked about that amazing stop that LaMelo had on Tyrese Halliburton. But it didn't even have to come down to that. They had to defend Halliburton on that final possession because they got the ball with less than 8 seconds to go. The Hornets did, got it to PJ in open space, and all he had to do was hold on to the ball and knock down free throw shots, and it could have made it a 3-possession game and a much tougher opportunity, and they would have had to throw it out of bounds. Instead, you give Halliburton an ISO opportunity that I think 9 times out of 10 he takes advantage of, especially because he had 43 points by that time. And then in this Dallas game, Walker, you have an opportunity. They gift you. Dallas gifts you an opportunity to get a sidelines out of bounds play to tie the game up, because the Hornets defense, again, coming through. They doubled Doncic. It rotated around to Grant Williams, but it was too late. They forced a shot clock violation and gave themselves a possession. And then what happens? 5-second violation. Brandon Miller can't get the ball out of his hands. It's partly on Brandon Miller. It's partly on Steve Clifford. These issues have been going on since the Bobcats days with Steve Clifford, sidelines out of bounds plays, either not getting you a good look or not getting you a look at all. It was details. That's why they lost the game.
Yeah, that was awful. The sidelines out of bounds play, that's going to be a big talking point. Honestly, maybe one we should have addressed sooner, but we're happy with LaMelo. And so that was the storyline. But man, that was a frustrating play. And just one thing before we move on, I will say I'm usually not, if we're to, boil this down into simple philosophies, I'm usually not a fan of allowing or playing like you did against a star player and allowing everybody else to get easier shots, because I just think the star player is going to get theirs no matter what. And Luka, you played well against Luka. I don't deny that at all. 23 points, I'll take that from Luka. There are people that think he's the best offensive player in the league. That might be true. You don't allow him to even, I don't even think they sent him to the foul line. He shot 7 times. That was 3 off of his average last year. PJ Washington, I thought, did a good job when he stayed in front. Even on the baskets he gave up, he's just hands up. We're not going to give you easy ones. You're going to have to work for it. The shots he did hit were faders, 2 in a row. So I get all that. My problem is Grant Williams gets a little bit more space that way, and then he knocks him down. Hardy gets a little bit more space because of that, and he knocks him down. These are still NBA players that are absolutely crazy at what they do. They're not Luka crazy. They're not Kyrie Irving crazy, but they're still really good. And so when you give the guys that just need to see something go in and you allow them to get a rhythm, that's a philosophy I'm not usually one to back. I like making sure nobody else beats you and letting Luka go off for 35. And honestly, Dallas hasn't been a winning franchise unless they get to the postseason and Luka, we know about. Yeah, at least with Luka, right? It's not, they got to the conference finals. We know how it is. That's just kind of my philosophy. And yet last night they played a nice defensive game plan against Luka and Kyrie, but everybody else, man, like Hardy just kept draining him. Grant Williams just kept draining him to the effect that what you were talking about.
But it wasn't until late that happened. I mean, they were able to.
Yeah, no, it was a good fourth quarter for them.
Yeah, it was an incredible fourth quarter. And I think it comes down to 2 things. It comes down to details and it comes down to gas. And if the Hornets had better shooting through the first 3 quarters and taken, if you take a 15 or 20 point lead, which wasn't out of the question had they knocked down a few more shots, if you had taken that into the fourth quarter, then you could have sustained that blow from Dallas. But I think it was both details, because you look at LaMelo and Nick Richards at the beginning of that fourth quarter, they turn it over a couple of times, and it results in a Hardaway corner 3. Hornets had to call timeout, and then Jaden Hardy attacked the rim really well for them at the early part of that fourth quarter. That's when Luka picked up the tech. But Gordon misses a couple of wide open shots. And again, they had to depend so much on Gordon Hayward. On a second night of a back-to-back, when they had to throw him the ball a ton, Gordon Hayward was, in front of his home crowd, in front of his family. And, he played well. But I just think by the end of that fourth quarter, the Hornets just ran out of gas. Mm-hmm. And then you leave it to Dallas, who's a great offensive team, to finish the job. But had you just gotten an opportunity with that sidelines out of bounds play, that one hurt, man. That one really hurt. That 5-second violation just really gave me Bobcats trauma flashbacks. But I would say the generally Walker, the attitude that I've seen around the subtext and around every Hornets box score and the fans that I interact with is that hope springs eternal in the hearts of Hornets fans because they saw LaMelo Ball get a 30-point triple-double, and they're dreaming big.
LaMelo is the story, no doubt. That is absolutely the story. That's Doug Branson, the substack, the subtext he was talking about. You can find all that information on everyhornetsboxscore.com. Make sure you go check it out, and then listen to me on sports radio every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m., 92.7 FM. Tomorrow, we'll continue to break down what we saw. Maybe a little more Brandon Miller conversation tomorrow, how he's getting his points. Only 3 of 12 in this game against Dallas, by far his worst shooting performance. But defensively, I think there were some things to like. So we'll dive into a little more of the Brandon Miller combo. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll be back with you tomorrow.